going to. Okay, great. Okay. So I'll just. I have no idea where that sound is coming from, but it's very artistic.
It's funny.
Someone's fur friend has joined the meeting.
Yes.
We may just want to ask people to mute themselves.
Yeah.
Except
Would
for the
everybody?
speakers.
Yeah. Would every? I'm going to. All right, that's better. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to give a quick introduction to open this session. For those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Turks. I work at the Blue Mountains World Heritage Institute. And firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all attending this session today and pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging.
It's fine, they're doing it.
Also, a big thank you to the Blue Mountains Cultural Centre for partnering with us on these events and for hosting these Zooms. It's been a real pleasure working with you. We have a great lineup of presenters this morning.
Oh, sorry.
I'm so sorry that someone's speaking over me. But basically, we have a great lineup of speakers, and we also have a wonderful facilitator in Kate Reid, who's been managing our Recovery Art project for the last few months and keeping our community connected throughout lockdown, which is no small feat. Kate will also be curating the Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions for our presenters, please pop them into the chat and we will facilitate that discussion at the end. But now, to officially kick off the session, it is my great pleasure to introduce David King, a Gundungurra man. Excuse me while I switch slides. Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Great.
Are we able to make that like there we go. Look at that. Okay. Morning, everyone. It's been a good start, with all those little random noises in the background. It feels like we're all in the same room. It's pretty cool. So yeah, technically I'm doing a welcome, so you don't have to ask me any questions at the end. Is that a good cop out to start off with? This is agreement and nods. Nah, cool. I'm a Gundungurra man. My granddad, my great-grandmother are from the Burragurang clan. If you understanding of the topography of the mountains, that's now called Warragamba. My mum was Auntie Mary King, and she was born in the gully at Katoomba that we call Gundungurra in our language. I'm just going to briefly go through a few slides to share my connection with country. I spoke the other day at a webinar, and we talked about disconnection, reconnection, connection. And I came from the Aboriginal perspective, but I think all of us at this point in time are coming out of that sort of sense of feeling, hence why we're on here today. And I think to sit down and look at this ecology, the arts, our connection to country, how we sit on country is a beautiful way, in my opinion, to come back to earth for all of us. We got up this morning and went out the back, and there were 2 king parrots sitting out our acacia longifolia, just munching on some beautiful fresh seed. And then we turned around and looked out the front, and 7 gang cockatoos just flew through the gully here where we live in Hazelbrook. It just gives you that sense of beauty, sense of connection, and that sense of belonging that we've had for thousands of years. Next slide, please. Recently, I've been listening to a few podcasts from ABC and just listening to stories across the country. We said just before we joined the big session that a lot of us have been able, through some of these webinars, to actually connect right across the country. And so hearing a little bit about the black cockatoos over in Western Australia made me think about my mum's connection to country. That's my mum sitting in what we call a gibbagunya, a rock shelter, out at McMahon's Point. And her journey her connection to country was in what I would call that living world. She sat in a rock shelter here. It's a massive rock shelter where the goannas, the lyrebirds, where the emu and the lyrebird people met and sat, and there's artifacts. And she started her journey of reconnection. She was removed as a little girl. It took her a while to come back to what we would call home. And then her sense of belonging and a sense of beauty with this beautiful piece of country that we call Gundungurra country began. Next slide, please. My mum always loved trees. And I remember just parking out here. We used to camp out here. It's called Battleship Tops because of that rock just behind her. And we did a restoration of country here. Someone had parked a car under there, set fire to it to get rid of our art. And we were able to sit there and restore the beauty and to recreate the images. Well, my mum, in her beautiful way, walked around and just touched the trees, looked at the plants, and had that beautiful connection. And then we all sat together and had what we call Darbo, a cup of tea, and enjoyed the restoration of that site. Next slide, please. It was a long way from 60 years before in the 1930s when my mum was removed from the gully. This was the picture they took of her before they would have stuck her in the paper to advertise her as a domestic or a farmhand. An 8-year-old child removed from country because of the simple fact she was Aboriginal. Next slide, please. In the late 80s, we went up to my grandmother, my mum's mother's grave at Katoomba, and there was a note on there. And it said, if you know this lady, please ring this number. I'd grown up a little bit with the fella in the background. That's Uncle Harold. He was a tracker, used up in the mountains to track down people that were lost, basically robbed the local stores. I never met Auntie Sharon Hall's dad. He's the man in the glasses. That's Uncle Len. He basically lived down on Darrabillat clan country in the Megalong, and you'll have a sensational speaker tomorrow. It feels like I'm pushing Ian's card a lot, isn't it? But my cousin Ian's on tomorrow, sensational man. His clan country down in the Megalong, and that little lady in the middle is my mum, and the lady to the right of her is Mary Egan. They hadn't seen each other for close on 60 years. And then through the fact that we could sit back on country, they got a photo together in Katoomba. I think it's the only photo that we got as we reconnected, as we began that journey. My mum was so proud to stand with her family. 1934 removed, 50 more years later, they stood together. Next slide, please. So I got to begin my journey. Because my mum reconnected, I started to sit on country more. I live near an occupation shelter at Hazelbrook. So I love pulling weeds, sitting on country, just seeing and sensing that beauty, the living culture, that living entity that we call country, in my opinion, is one of the most beautiful artistic pieces you'll ever find. So we started to reconnect. My mum and I didn't get on a lot as a kid, but as I sat on country and she came down with us, we did a lot of bush care, and that little girl outside the hut in the gully was in a little lady full of life. I'm sure if she was with us today, she'd probably tell me off for showing this photo. So if I better watch out when I get out the front, because that little red-bellied black snake might come past, reminding me, you be careful, David King, your mum's watching you. But here we are down in the Megalong, just talking about country, the joy of connecting, seeing that beauty, sitting in those trees, talking about the stories, the artifacts, the water, everything that makes country so beautiful. Next slide, please. So I got to share stories. I was able then, through that connection, to start talking about country, the use of plants, the way we paint it up, the reasons and all the stories around our connection. Next slide, please. Also got to wear good suits, eh? And then came the fires, hey. My mum loved Narrowneck. She walked Narrowneck as a kid. One, to earn pocket money, and two, to sit with her family before she was removed. She might have gone there afterwards, but we're not sure. And I think it was January last year. Time's gone so fast. After those fires, to go up to Narrowneck and to see what I could only describe as death, to hear nothing, to see nothing, and to see this tree reaching out like the hand of my mum, just in pain, just trying to understand, just trying to fathom. Me and my girlfriend Bella, we just cried. We were just up there. We took these photos. It was so moving. It hurt. We really need to start to look at how we can care for country, and seminars like these where we gather together to get people to, as I say, look out and look up, is what we need to do. We need to get people to connect, to understand, so we don't see this pain, to capture these moments, to reflect that we maybe hopefully never go there again. Because those of us in the mountains have seen the beauty on this site now, with those pink flannel flowers that came out, and the xantharias and the spears that came out of this site. But the destruction, we need to get the balance. Next slide, please. So I had a cup of tea, I reflected, and we've worked so hard over the last couple of years to try to see how we can ensure we don't keep on going there. How do we keep not just the Blue Mountains, but this planet healthy? How do we get people to understand the impacts? Next slide. How do we regain that connection? But I have the honour of being one of the people down in the gully that was my beeper to say I've got 3 seconds, so I'm doing well. Watch this will be a quick 3 seconds. How do we get people to connect? I have the honour of being one of the volunteers at Gargary Swamp Care, and I see people come down there from the whole community and connect to country. They take photos. There's a great couple on this that I spotted earlier that record the birds. There are people that sample water, their kids that play. We have the campfire, we tell the stories, and the beauty starts to grow. We need to create those images that drive people to sit in that silence and peace of country. Next slide, please. Our actual classroom was on country. This is a rock shelter. I never take a wide angle because some of you smart mob on here always can work out where I am. It's not too far from home, but it's a beautiful picture of Bayami. You can see the lyrebird and the emu ochre prints. You can see the beginning of a journey where Bayami is there in the middle. This cave begins a journey. And I hope that today and tomorrow, as we sit and listen and talk, that all of us connect and begin that journey. In my language, Gulumbanyan Gundungurra Maranu, I'm a Gundungurra man. My songline goes through the Burragarang, Gadumba, and to the Derrabalat country. Punai Daru is Mother Earth. Let's protect it. Let's look after these ancestral lands. Bayami, God, Mother Earth. Let's have those words, Yadang Baral, which means day good, just all across our country. Welcome to this great seminar. I hope that you have a great time. I hope that we, as I said the other day, that we all get to sit together and we all begin to tell our stories together, that we can create images that for thousands of years. This art cave is at least 600 years old and the art behind it goes longer. Let's make our stories go forever, please. Next slide, please. My spirit bird's a yellowtail black cockatoo. Bella and I get to see those quite often. Let's hope by the end tomorrow, around lunchtime, that our spirits will fly high, that our birds will connect, that we connect, we learn, and we all journey and grow together. Yada me. Welcome from elders past and present. I hope you have a great weekend together at this seminar. Cheers.
Thank you so much, David, for your welcome and that beautiful way to start today. There's so much richness in that. I also would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I'll echo David in saying that today, hopefully this is an ongoing conversation, just one of many that are all had around the world about the state of the planet and how ecology and art and culture can sit together to make change. For those who don't know me, I'm Kate Reid. I'll be the chair for today. For the last 6 months, I've had the honor of being project manager for the Blue Mountains World Heritage Institute's recovery project, of which this seminar is a concluding part. Our artists and citizen scientists have delved deep into the World Heritage Institute's archives. They've told their personal stories. They've employed interviews and trawled through journalistic data. They've walked, they've talked, and they've undertaken new and novel creative processes. Via these processes, we have collectively created a body of work that speaks to the impacts of the 2019-2020 fires and more. The works can be viewed now, live since last night, at our new online exhibition space and website, which is ecoart.space. I will put it in the chat in a minute when we get to the next speaker. This seminar is to launch the website, to broaden our EcoArt family, build connections, and take the conversations that we have all been having further. Our next speaker for today is Liz Bastian from the Blue Mountains City Council. Liz is currently the program lead for the Blue Mountains City Council's Planetary Health Action Program. She's previously worked for Council as the Cultural Development Coordinator and in public programs for the Cultural Centre. Liz is a practicing artist and ran a gallery in Blackheath for 4 years called Stop Laughing, This Is Serious. She's been an art teacher, lecturer of the Orange Regional Gallery and CEO of Arts Out West, which is the regional cultural development organisation for Central New South Wales. Today, Liz will be talking about the role of arts in the Planetary Health Initiative. Welcome, Liz, and I'm going to hand over to you and start your clock.
Thank you so much, Kate. And it's really lovely to be here talking to everyone. It's exciting that Blue Mountains City Council is putting planetary health as one of its highest priorities. And the Planetary Health Initiative is actually a citywide approach to working with the whole community. And I think this is a very timely week to be doing this presentation and to bringing people together with so many different creative voices, because earlier this week, I don't know if anyone saw it, but Facebook announced that it was hiring 10,000 people in Europe to create the metaverse. And I think that we need to make sure our creative voices rise up from the grassroots to, in reverse, create the pluriverse, or a plurality of creative voices to vision the future we want, not one that is coming down on us from the technological corporations that are trying to control the stories that we tell. And so it's stories that have always changed culture. And that's why creative people are really, really important for cultivating the desire for planetary health, cultivating the desire for a different sort of world, and demonstrating that if we work together, we can actually heal country, heal nation, and heal the planet interestingly, in council, we're doing lots of art making and visioning to see how we can change the story and bring people forward. This was a little sketch in the early days where we looked at the notion of a spiral and how spirals can go way back in time and way forward into the future. And we've been looking way back to how traditional owners were wonderful stewards of this land, and then coming to this moment in time where our local government is actually initiating this planetary health project, and one by one, or all at the same time really, bringing different sectors of the community in, community groups, organisations, education and research, business, artists, collaborations, everyone. And together we'll be able to create the rainbow of hope for the future. So I'll just see if I can go forward. I think it's stuck, so just a moment. There we go. So when we were playing around with ideas, one of the ideas that came up was that Planetary Health Initiative for short is PHI, which is the Greek letter for the Greek letter 5 for the golden ratio. So we were looking at the idea of how this spiral could bring everything together in the most beautiful harmony. And I had a lovely drawing that some young people had done of how they hoped, how they were thinking we could bring world problems and put hope and change and everything and really change the world. And so then I actually brought that spiral into that drawing to show how in the center was love, and we could create this vision of hope for the young people. And then the team at council came up with this beautiful graphic of a coloured spiral to use for all our social media. And just this week, we've started our Facebook page, Blue Mountains Planetary Health Initiative, which would be wonderful if you'd like it and follow it, because we'll be sharing everything we'll be doing there. And we also have an Instagram account where the staff created a beautiful little animation that you can go and have a look at, which looks at the way one single person, one action can actually come together and create a massive change, and that even our small actions really do make a difference. So that little animation is both on the Facebook and the Instagram pages. One of the things we're doing is, as well in council with all our brainstorming, and this is part of our strategic business plan now for the Planetary Health Initiative, is deep time visioning. So we're looking at the fact that scientists are saying we're in the Anthropocene, in an era where humanity has actually changed the biophysical makeup of the world through its actions. And we're saying that's not where we want to sit and where we want to see the end of the story. We want to actually move beyond the Anthropocene, which some people say will only be a geological blip, hopefully, and that we will move towards the Symbiocene. The Symbiocene is a word that was coined by Glenn Albrecht, who wrote a book called Earth Emotions. And the Symbiocene, as he coined it, is the next era where we live in a symbiotic relationship with one another and the natural world. And so we're looking at going right back in the past, but we're also now planning for 500 years from now. Usually councils plan for 20 years ahead. Right throughout council, we've started the conversation of how do we plan for 500 years? If we want to replant rainforest timbers that take 500 years to grow and create canopy, let's start putting that in place now. How can we make sure our young people have a future to enjoy? And all other species as well. So in 2021, council became the first in Australia to adopt the rights of nature. And part of the story we need to change is the story of human exceptionalism, where we think we're separate or better than nature. And that's part of what's destroyed the world, or so many parts of the world, not the whole world, but parts of the world to date. So this is a lovely exhibition from Scandinavia, where some of the older people in the community started visualizing themselves as part of nature, not separate from nature. And so that's a role that artists can have to try and see themselves and show everyone in the world, help people feel what it is to be part of nature, not separate or superior to nature. This month, we're actually kicking off our public programming for the sort of Planetary Health initiative that I'm managing. All of council is doing work on planetary health. So when I talk about the part that I'm managing, it's one component of the entire council, because we're putting planetary health into every policy and every strategy. And obviously here at the Cultural Centre, this is a planetary health initiative. But some of the projects that I'm starting in are centred a little bit around the Katoomba Golf Course, but also the wider city. There's a master plan happening on the Katoomba Golf Course, but what we're doing is a basic pollinator survey of the golf course so that we can have a baseline to measure our success against as we bring back habitat for biodiversity. And we're going to be sharing lots of videos about pollinators, and in particular, the many native bees that have just started waking up around the Blue Mountains. So if you go to our Facebook page at the moment, you can watch a gorgeous video with a young ecologist who is going to be sharing information about our local pollinators, and particular our local bees. And with the library, we're going to be doing a book reading for young people to learn about native bees. This is a new book about native bees called Bee Detectives. And we'll also be getting everyone to get involved in the Wild Pollinator Count, which is part of Australian Pollinator Week from the 13th to the 21st of November. So we're encouraging everyone to be citizen scientists, and you can actually book in for a workshop with Emily, the ecologist, on our council page. So recently, on the 6th of October, many of the planetary health organisations and the Planetary Health Global Alliance came together and signed the Sao Paulo Declaration on Planetary Health. In it, they had a little paragraph for artists, poets, writers, and musicians. And they said they urge creative people to help humanity fashion new narratives about our relationship to nature and to each other that rejects the myth of human exceptionalism and emphasises our interdependence. They've asked for everyone to revitalise and highlight the richness and beauty of diverse cultural traditions and languages that we have, and especially to celebrate environment and health interlinkages. Create art that reflects what the great transition can look and feel like and inspires people to act. One of my favourite quotes is by Raymond Williams, and he says, "To be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing." And we're doing a number of hashtags through our posts, one important one being We Are Nature, but also in June this year, the United Nations declared the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And it's the last decade of the Sustainable Development Goals, which have their target as 2030. So for the next 10 years, they're really urging everyone to become Generation Restoration. And we'll be doing all sorts of programs, including with David King, to look at our wonderful Muli Nadu Sweetwater Cultural Connections program that will be part of what we're doing through the Planetary Health Initiative. So we'd love you to get involved. We'd love you to start sharing photos of the amazing little insects we share this beautiful Blue Mountains with. Discover the difference between flies, hoverflies, native bees, introduced bees, and help us measure them and put them onto the Wild Pollinator Count so we can all see what's happening with our biodiversity, because these small little insects are critical to our future and they're sharing this place with us. And finally, what we're trying to do is help everyone have something or someone to love, have hope for the future, and find something that they can do to contribute to this important mission and journey that we're on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. It's such an inspiring initiative. Very much look forward to getting down there. I love that the golf course is being reconditioned, let's say.
I'll just can I just quickly on that note say that the golf course is going through a master planning process. So it means that at the moment, there's no planetary health initiatives actually taking place on the golf course, but we're trying to inspire the community to understand what planetary health can mean for our future. And then the master planning process will go out to everyone in the community to give feedback into it, to how we can make this the most amazing place going forward as a place for the whole of the Blue Mountains. So I'd urge people to walk around the golf course, have a look at its extraordinary potential. You can organise to have a walking meeting with me there as well. But it's a process that will be going into next year.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much for all that information. Yes, very much look forward to watching this space. It's very exciting. Thank you so much, Liz, for speaking to us today. Our next speaker is Sabrina Roesner from the Blue Mountains Cultural Centre. Sabrina is based in Blackheath and is currently the Artistic Programs Manager at the Blue Mountains City Art Gallery, where she manages the exhibitions and public programs, delivering over 25 exhibitions and 150 public programs annually. Sabrina's academic background is in cultural leadership and arts management. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Hamburg, Germany, and she's currently finalising her Masters in Cultural Heritage Management at Deakin University. She is a member of the Australian Museums and Galleries Association, the International Council of Museums, and the International Council on Monuments and Sites, where she's coordinating member of the Scientific Committee for Intangible Cultural Heritage. Sabrina's focus across her practice is on developing exhibitions and arts programs that put the spotlight on environmental and sustainable practices. Today, Sabrina will be talking on embedding eco-sustainability within the arts. Thank you so much for coming, Sabrina, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Kate. And I would just like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Blue Mountains World Heritage Institute for putting together such a wonderful program of inspiring speakers, and of course, launching your Eco Arts Recovery website, an online exhibition yesterday. It looks absolutely fantastic. So yeah, congratulations to all of the artists and everyone involved. What a big job. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen with you. Great. Can you all see that okay? Lovely. Okay. So I'm going to talk today to you about how environmental sustainability and the arts are interconnected and how artistic and cultural practices can contribute to a more sustainable future. And I'm going to show you some examples from the Culture Centre program so that you can see what that looks like in practice. And it's really lovely doing this after Liz's talk. I think the initiatives like the Planetary Health Initiative from Council and also, of course, the Eco Arts Recovery Project are just some really brilliant examples of ways that we can work collectively together to achieve a better future. Okay. Okay. So we're finding ourselves in unprecedented times where climate change, war, humanitarian crises, and a global pandemic are immediate threats to our planet and our society. In 2015, the UN defined the most pressing global challenges that need to be addressed by 2030. And just to put that in perspective, that is now less than 9 years away. Based on these global challenges, the UN developed the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted by all UN member states in the now famous Paris Agreement. And you can see those 17 goals on the screen. These goals provide a global framework for action as governments and communities across the world work towards more sustainable ways of living by implementing these principles into decision-making at all levels. And Council is also using those Sustainable Development Goals, in their Planetary Health Initiative. Okay. So how do the UN Sustainability Goals apply to the arts? And what contributions are creatives, artists, and arts organizations making to sustainable development? How do we create positive change and environmental awareness and bring communities together? So I would like to give you some examples in the next couple of slides, how the arts can play a fundamental role in contributing to the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and create positive change by highlighting and increasing awareness about environmental issues and by bringing communities together to develop creative ideas for a better future. So what you see there are just a few ways that the arts has been recognized and contributes to the Sustainable Development Outcome Goals by creating civic engagement, environmental and social issues, for example, by highlighting and promoting the value of traditional knowledge to sustainable practices and solutions, by addressing current environmental and social issues through creative expressions and unique perspectives, and by collaboration with community groups to address issues that are relevant to them and their region. So how does that look in practice? Creating civic engagement with environmental and social issues. So galleries, museums, and cultural centres, for example, play a significant role in engaging audiences with sustainability issues by creating a platform for learning, debate, and discussion. By presenting exhibitions and delivering workshops and education programs, they can involve people and communities directly with issues that are relevant to them. So in the example that you see here, that is, for example, young people, what you can see on the slide is the Regenerate project, which was originally developed by Orange Regional Gallery and then adapted for the Blue Mountains Culture Centre after the 1920 bushfires. Regenerate was a communal creative exploration of how Australian bushland responds to fire and engaged over 2,100 school children by addressing the devastating experience of the bushfires, but also by teaching participants about the resilience of the bush and the regenerative properties of eucalypt species that thrive after fire. So what you can see there are hundreds and hundreds of leaves, eucalypt leaves, that were painted and written on by school children. Sorry, I'm working across 3 screens here today, so just bear with me. Okay. So highlighting and promoting the value of traditional knowledge to sustainable practices and solutions. For millennia, First Nations people in Australia and across the world have looked after country in sustainable ways. They've cared for waterways, they've managed country through cultural burning, and they've cared for animals and their ecosystems. As artists, arts workers, and arts organizations, we need to ensure that we foster respect and promote the importance of the contributions by First Nations artistic and cultural practitioners to creating a more sustainable world. And of course, in the Blue Mountains, as you know, Aboriginal communities have a strong commitment to caring for country. And of course, on the large image on the right there, you can see the wonderful David King, who spoke earlier. And that's David at the Threatened Species Day, which we hosted at the Culture Centre in 2018. And this day combined talks, an exhibition and community activities that informed about and addressed threatened species issues. And David is standing in front of a habitat drawing by Freedom Wilson. I think Freedom is also here today. And Freedom, you have to correct me because I always pronounce it wrong, but I think is the endangered Daris aquarius, or well, the double-tailed buttercup orchid. So you can see this beautiful drawing there that shows the ecosystem of that particular orchid. And David has been part of many of our projects here at the Cultural Centre. He's an incredible source of knowledge and inspiration. So thank you, David, for always being so generous with your time and joining us for our programs and sharing your knowledge with us. The small image on the left shows a photographic installation and a canoe, which we exhibited at the end of last year for our inaugural Planetary Health exhibition. And this project was led by Gundungurra elder Auntie Sharon Holtz, who works with a range of community groups to look after country and to teach the importance of our traditional cultural values. The images that you see were from 2013, when Auntie Sharon and archaeologist Michael Jackson led a multi-day hike following Gundungurra ancestral pathways through the southern parts of the Blue Mountains. And this walk was undertaken to celebrate the achievements of all people who have crossed the mountains for a time, and to draw attention to the uniqueness and richness of Aboriginal occupation in the area. And then on the small image at the bottom left, you can see Chris Tobin, Darug man, cultural educator, and an artist who has strong involvement with the community in the Blue Mountains. And through art and storytelling, Chris connects Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people and works towards enhancing understanding and respect for the rich and beautiful culture of the Darug people. Again, so for the same exhibition, Chris activated the public spaces of the Cultural Centre through collaborative artworks made from ochre. All right. And then, one of the probably more recognised ways that art and artistic expressions contribute towards environmental and social goals is, by highlighting that through creative artworks and expressions. So historically, arts and cultural practices have been instrumental in spawning societal transformation by addressing and confronting humanity's greatest challenges. Social injustice, economic imbalances, and environmental concerns are addressed by renowned artists around the world, such as Ai Weiwei, Olaf Eliasson, and of course in Australia, Janet Lawrence. And whilst we do have all of the scientific reports and media providing us with like a wealth of information about environmental challenges, it really does not suffice to achieve a collective shift in consciousness and to drive personal change or behavioral changes. So the arts have this inherent ability to connect and communicate with its audience on an emotional level. Artistic expressions and practices have a strong impact on the human consciousness, but in creating these connections, and connecting us with issues at hand, and then facilitating a shift in thinking. And artists are also not beholden to the current political narrative, so they can ask the uncomfortable questions. You can see two artworks here that we have exhibited at the Cultural Centre in recent years. On the left, you have Janet Lawrence's work, The Memory of Nature. And this work addresses the fragility of nature, of natural environments, and asks questions around sustainability. And her work emphasizes states of transformation as well as cycles of life and death. So she has like organic matter there, and scientific instruments and references like museum models of display. So basically, placing items into a museum display that may have existed before, but now you can only see it behind glass. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a work by Nicole Welch titled Wilderness Land. And that work reflects on the inherent loss and uncertainty that we face for our natural environment. In this particular image, Nicole stands naked on the edge of a plateau overlooking the Grose Valley, facing an approaching storm, and she is wrapped in a Victorian lace shawl, representing, the loss and mourning for our natural environment. Okay. And last but not least, collaboration with community groups to address issues relevant to their region and to find sustainable solutions. So there's so many unique ways for artists and arts organizations to collaborate with our communities, and we can do that by bringing different types of knowledge and professions and areas of expertise together. So in early 2020, after the horrific bushfires, the Cultural Centre invited the local community to send images of their experiences from their time, and that resulted in over 130 community members contributing a photograph for their exhibition. And you can see that on the left-hand side there, where we printed about 50 of those images, and then we had the remainder on as a digital slideshow. And so this show was really beautiful because it didn't just showcase the traumatic events of the fires, but also reflected on the resilience of the community and the resilience of the landscape. Then in the center image, you can see a really beautiful collaboration that we did with the Blue Mountains Beekeepers Club, And we installed a number of beehives on the culture centre's rooftop garden. And then the beekeeper group ran regular workshops here at the culture centre and taught visitors about the importance of bees and what they mean for us, our community, our parks and bushland management practices, and of course, pollinator conservation and resilience. And sorry, Paul, I think you are here today. I just had to put this image up of our wonderful director, Paul Brinkman, in a beekeeper's hat. He was so excited. So that was when we put the bees into the garden there, and Paul was driving that initiative for the culture centre. And then we also launched our edible rooftop garden, which is run by a dedicated group of knowledgeable volunteers. And the herbs and the veggies produced by our garden are then used in our cafe menu. So it's basically straight from the garden to your plate. And that does not only reduce the need to buy and transport produce, but it also decreases packaging and waste production by our cafe operations. And yeah, that was my little presentation. I hope that has given you some examples of how, you know, arts and eco-sustainability are very much linked, and how we can help to foster understanding and embed eco-sustainable principles in our operations.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, speaking to us from the Cultural Centre. As a local, I'm very much enjoying having the Cultural Centre now placed in our community, and all the wonderful things they do. Thank you so much for all of those insights. Our next speaker is David Curtis. David is an ecologist, musician, and president of Eco Arts Australis. David has over 40 years of practical and theoretical experience in revegetation, farm forestry, land care, and conservation across Australia. David's career has included work as a university lecturer, environmental educator, researcher, and policy advisor in the non-government, university, and public sectors. He is an honorary fellow at the University of Wollongong. David's ecological research included a 10-year study into the regeneration and rehabilitation of ecosystems impacted by rural dieback. His research examined the role that the arts have in shaping environmental attitudes and behaviours. David found that the arts could significantly affect environmental attitudes through aiding in the communication of environmental information, creating empathy for the natural environment, and catalysing ecological sustainability. He has organised several large community arts events and, as mentioned, is president of Eco Arts Australis, which is a group dedicated to using the arts to further environmental sustainability. David is currently writing a book on the role of how the arts shape environmental behaviour, and a graphic novel about climate change. Today, David will be speaking on the role of arts in shaping environmental behaviour. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks for inviting me to speak today. I am speaking from Wollongong, New South Wales, which is the traditional land of the Darrabal people, the home of the cabbage tree palm tree, and I'll pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. To do justice to the eco arts in Australia and abroad in 10 minutes is probably impossible in 10 minutes. So I thought what I would do is synthesize it down to 3 pathways through which the arts can promote pro-environmental behaviour, drawing on examples from some of the conferences that we've organised over the last few years, as well as case studies from my own research. There's 3 pathways I think that the arts can promote pro-environmental behaviour. The first is through communicating information, whether that's increasing a cognitive interest in nature or provoking emotional indignation about degradation. The second pathway is where the arts create an empathy and emotional affinity to nature. And the third pathway is where the arts are built into or catalyse ecologically sustainable development. And I would like to focus on 2 areas of this: transformative action, where the arts are part of restoration projects or other types of ecological sustainable development projects. So the first pathway, creating a cognitive interest in nature, there's lots of examples, particularly in environmental education, where the arts have been used to create interest or knowledge about the environment This is an example from our last conference, the Tree Veneration Society based in Sydney, who they run these fantastic workshops, among other things, that incorporate science, but also a lot of art to educate the public and children about the value of trees in our landscapes. An example of where the arts has been used to create an awareness of the consequences of our action is Leapfish, a company that has run big programs with schools to focus on energy consumption, water consumption. They build in performance into their workshops, heavily influenced by circus and magic, and then they run these workshops with the kids. And they measured 3 months after their programs, they measured 15% decrease in daily electricity consumption and 11% reduction in daily water consumption of the families of the children that participated in those workshops. I'm sure many of you can think of artworks that evoke indignation about degradation. This was an amazing example from our last conference brought by Jill Sampson, an artist in central Queensland. She wanted to highlight the problems of the Bimblebox Nature Reserve, which is right in the middle of a coal mining area and is a home of 153 bird species. She brought together 450 artists to produce this incredible travelling exhibition of visual and audio artworks to promote, to highlight and to raise awareness about the plight of that nature reserve. So the second pathway is where the arts create empathy for the natural environment, and I'm sure all of you would have pictures on the wall, or there's music or performances that has inspired your love of nature. This was a nice example from our last conference of an ephemeral art project of several artists in the southern Moreton Bay area. When we think of pro-environmental behaviour, it's predictable by what people know about the environment, about nature, and the level to which they're indignant about degradation. That makes sense, but it's been found that an emotional affinity towards nature is as important a predictor of pro-environmental behaviour as these other factors, and so art of this type is important to shift people's attitudes. The third pathway is where the arts are part of catalysing ecologically sustainable development. This is an example of an ecological restoration project in Armidale, New South Wales. It's been taking place for many years along a gully through Armidale. And each year there's a big music festival there. And as part of one a couple of years ago, Australis commissioned 4 ephemeral artists to create ephemeral artworks to be placed within that restoration project. And there's other similar examples have come to some of our recent conferences. And this is another example where the arts have been embedded in ecologically sustainable development. The artist Claire Tracy, who works with several different big organisations, she makes these extraordinary sculptures out of plastic waste. This is one that she did in collaboration with Melbourne City Council. And she also did another project with Flight Centre, and over 6 months was collecting all this plastic waste and making these extraordinary sculptures, and in the process actually shifted the whole behaviour of that company towards its rubbish, minimising its rubbish. In this context, I also wanted to mention celebrationist events. These are events that I define as involving multiple art forms, large numbers of community participants, and a celebratory in their nature in terms of the relationship of the human's relationship to nature. This is one of the big case studies that I looked at as part of my own research. It was an ecological chorale called Plague and the Moonflower that was staged by the Armidale community. Something like 300 participants, audience of 10,000 people, and among other things, we created this enormous puppet 6 metres high out of 3,000 plastic shopping bags. When I went to survey the audience and participants, 74% of the survey respondents said it made them reflect about humanity's relationship with the natural environment. Something like 2/3 of them said it made them want to change their behaviour. So these events are really important, I think, as part of eco-arts practice. Also, the arts as an industry is an industry with high embodied labour and low embodied energy. Barney Foran and his associates did this incredible study a few years ago where they looked at all the different sectors in the economy, and the arts as an industry has relatively low greenhouse gas emissions when compared with other sectors of the economy, and low water use, land use disturbance, but relatively high employment for the level of production that it produces. So to give you a bit of some graphs on this, the arts as a component of GDP. You can see it as an industry, it's as big as the meat products industry and the sheep and shorn wool industry and the structural metal industry in terms of what it contributes to GDP. This is it compared with all the other sectors of the economy in terms of its employment creation, its intensity of employment. So you can see it's a relatively high employer, and it's a relatively low greenhouse gas emitter. So if you're a policy person or a government interested in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the arts is a sector of the economy that you'd be encouraging. And that's highly relevant in the conversations that we're having in Australia at the moment. So I'd like to just reflect now just on a few trends that we've noticed after running these 3 conferences over the last several years. There's many individual artists that practice eco-arts, to environmentally themed work, whether it's to create empathy for nature or to communicate or provoke indignation. But what we've seen, I think, increasingly is these multi-artist collaborations. So several of the case studies that I've already mentioned this morning were multi-artist collaborations. This is another one from our last conference, which was a multi-artist collaboration with the Artist in Residence Science Program of the Queensland Government. This group of artists worked with a group of scientists who are studying this erosion problems, and they include visual artists, performing artists and poets who produce this beautiful body of work around that. And this collaboration with scientific organisations is also something that we're seeing a lot of increasingly, whether it's individual artists or groups of artists working with individual scientists or groups of scientists, scientific organisations or other organisations such as councils and corporations. This was a nice example from one of our previous conferences between an American ecologist, Nalini Nadkarni, and a dance company, Jodie Lamask. And finally, the third trend we're seeing, particularly within Australian eco-arts practice, is the inspiration from Indigenous ways of seeing, whether that's through direct involvement of Aboriginal artists or whether it's non-Indigenous artists working with Aboriginal communities to create the work. And this is an example from an artist in Melbourne, Catherine von Wilgenberg, a big land art project she did as part of an ecological restoration project there, and she works closely with the Aboriginal communities in her practice. So that's it from me. I hope that gives a useful overview, a framework to view the arts, and I'll be happy to participate in the questions later in the morning. Thank you. And what's happened? Oh, what happened?
Kate, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you so much for that, David. Very interested in your work on the arts as a carbon neutral industry. Is some very interesting information, I think, as you said, for our government, and just the efficacy of the arts. I've definitely, all speakers here today, I would love to listen to speak for hours. It's almost frustrating. So hopefully this is the first of many sessions. It feels like it's a bit of a taster to people's information. Thank you so much for that information. And you packed a hell of a lot into your 10 minutes there. Our next speaker is Barbara Lepani. She is a social and cultural innovator whose special skill, in her words, is connecting the dots. In Barbara's words, this means finding connections in complex information and turning that into a coherent story around the challenges of our time. Barbara is a sociologist of technological change and a long-term student and practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism with a deep and abiding interest in ways of knowing, which in this era of fake news, the dark arts of technological manipulation, and a growing evidence of a deep psychosis in the human population has never been more pressing. Barbara's words. Barbara has worked in the public, university, and non-government sectors and in social and technological policy. As a recovering techno-optimist and having completed a 3-year retreat in the meditative methods and philosophy of Tibetan Buddhism, Barbara is now devoting her energies to working with people in the creative arts to find a language that recovers our sense of interbeing with the natural world. Barbara, thank you so much for joining us today, and very much look forward to what you're going to tell us about all of those wonderful dot points. Are you on mute, Barbara?
Yeah, I've just taken myself off.
Fantastic. No worries.
Well, good morning, everyone. And I'm speaking to you from the Gundungurra and Darug country, but the Wild Mountain Collective, that is a project that I set up as part of the Blue Mountains Creative Arts Network, takes in the whole of the Greater Blue Mountains. So we also would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people who occupy the land to the west of the Blue Mountains, and particularly the city of Lithgow, where I was born. We see ourselves as building on the songline tradition of Australia's First Nations people. And I take really as my starting point a quote from Richard Tarnas, who's a philosopher who's written about Western cultural perspectives. Our worldview is not simply the way we look at the world. It reaches inwards to shape our innermost sense of being. It deeply configures our psychic and somatic experience, the patterns of our sensing, knowing, and interacting with our world. And from this point of view, and I guess from my own experience, I think the greatest challenge facing we white fellas, non-Indigenous people of the world, particularly of Australia, is the hegemonic nature of the Western worldview. We just take it for granted that it's the way to see and think and feel. But we also are in a country that is shaped by a very ancient tradition of a different knowledge system, that of the First Nations people of this country. And one of the really inspiring things about today is that we've got a whole new generation of First Nations intellectuals, creatives, thinkers, filmmakers, poets, writers, dancers, who are building this bridge between the Western way of knowing and the First Nations people's way of knowing. And David spoke about that himself, about this whole principle of reconnecting. And to me, this is the greatest challenge we face. It's a knowledge systems challenge that has to underpin all of the scientific and other sort of activities we do. So we have Leanne Tobin, a Darug artist, as our patron. And if we want to understand the songline tradition, I would like to recommend to the audience here, there's 2 books you should absolutely read. One is called Song Spirals by the Guwe group of women of Northeast Arnhem Land. And the other is Songlines, The Power and Promise by Margot Neal Nawagara and Lynn Kelly. Because the inspiring thing about the songlines is they kept this knowledge tradition alive through the arts. They sang it, they danced it, they story told it, they performed it through ceremony. And it's an oral tradition of incredible power that created this fundamental sense of interbeing that describes the First Nations way of relating to country. Next slide. So one of the ways that we can do this is to actually support initiatives by First Nations people. And one of them is Regenerative Songlines Australia, which is calling for all of us to contribute projects to the ecosystem that they're seeking to build. And another one is First Nation, it's called Songline Dream or Futures Dreaming, sorry. And I think one of the members of that group is on the Planetary Art Initiative Advisory Committee. So we should get behind these initiatives that are actually being led by First Nations people. And in the spirit of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, they're inviting non-Indigenous Australians to join them. So for me, it's time we followed in their footsteps rather than simply paying acknowledgement to them. Next slide, please. So one of the ways as the Wild Mountain Collective, we're just a small voluntary organisation of people. We're just a collection, a loose collection of artists and musicians and thinkers. So we do just different things. So one of the ideas we do is exploring idea seminars, and working with one of my friends up here in the mountains, Lorraine Shannon, we put on a series of seminars, and here you see one working with the wonderful Janet Lawrence and Louise Fowler, who were sharing their work as eco-artists and coming all the way up to the Blue Mountains for free and giving us the benefit of their experience. Next slide, please. Then another one of the activities we do, we call it Encountering the Wild, and we carry out this as a multi-arts event at the Gallery H site at Dargan, which is at the Monkey Creek Escarpment near Lithgow, where we bring together art, an art exhibition of sculpture and paintings, live music, and together we always have a community conversation. In the first year we ran it, we invited Wayne Brennan, a First Nations rock ecologist, to come and talk to us about rock art and culture of the Blue Mountains. And the second year we invited Leanne Tobin and Jacinta Tobin to come and speak with a non-Indigenous anthropologist, Inga Reeby, about this whole business of how do you know across cultures? How do you see other cultures from their side rather than trying to see it through the lens of your own culture? The next slide, please. Another project that I'm working on is with a Bunjalung Yagul artist, Janelle Randall Court. And she's always had a long interest in how do we rethink our whole relationship to domestic waste. So Janelle's got a project that's running through from December through till June next year, funded by Wentworth Health as part of the bushfire recovery money, where she's showing a film screening in December on Wasteland, which is a documentary about using the art to work with waste pickers in Brazil to reimagine and reframe the relationship to domestic waste. And then she's running a series of workshops, arts workshops with community, where people will actually directly work with recovered waste to create artworks. And then we'll have an exhibition of those. Next slide, please. Another project that I've just begun working on with OWN, which is the Older Women's Network Blue Mountains, is we're sort of diving into the whole sort of housing crisis, which to me is a sort of a reflection of the pathology of the current kind of economy that we're running. To look at two particular groups here in the Greater Blue Mountains that are affected, the low income people working in the creative arts sector, and their incomes are less than half the average income of Australians. And then older single women, who are the fastest growing group of people facing homelessness. So we're sort of looking into this, trying to contextualize it as part of this general pattern of how do we rethink our whole relationship to economy, society, and one another in a spirit of interbeing in our relationship to country and community. Next slide, please. Another project that or event that I'm working on, which reflects my Buddhist interest, is Calling the Earth to Witness. And this was an event that was designed originally as part of the Festival of Resilience, which has now been postponed. And it features, you can see on the lower, Kunshot Gyaltsen, who it's the Tibetan refugee community. There's a small community of these people living in Katoomba. So Kunshot is an artist, and he's a photographer, and he's from Amdo, which is in northern Tibet. And so he's also a wonderful nomadic singer. Then there's Kempo Sering Tashi, who you see there with his drum and dodge and bell doing a Buddhist ceremony, who lives here in Katoomba. On the left is Jenny Key, and the famous Australian artist who lives at Blackheath. And then on the right, down the bottom, is Chosm Tenzin, who's a Canadian anthropologist who worked with the nuns in Nangchen and now lives in Sydney. So all of them are exploring what it means when the Buddha achieved enlightenment and he called the earth to witness his understanding of the causes of human suffering and how to escape that suffering by developing our own inherent capacity for inner wisdom. So that will happen next year as part of the Festival of Resilience, but also we'll put that event on in Sydney early next year when we'll launch 2 books that I managed to self-publish during our lockdown, and one of which is the history of East Tibet between 1855 and 1955 through the lives of a number of spiritual masters and political actors. And the other book is my memoir, The Call of the Dakini, which is the inner call to really face life's troubles and dance in a way of flowing with life, in answering a call to the yearning for our own wisdom awareness. Next slide, please. This is another project the Wild Mountain Collective put on with some funding from Create New South Wales called Timescapes, which we did in collaboration with Sharon Howard from the Gangang Gallery in Lithgow and Henrik Topolnitsky, who runs Gallery H. He's a sculptor. So our contribution was to create a soundscape. And for this, we interviewed a whole range of people. The people that we interviewed for this were Sharon Riley and Patsy Wolfenden from Lithgow, who are Wiradjuri people, Chris Tobin and Lex Dadd from the Blue Mountains, who are both Darug people, and then non-Indigenous people, Sean Butler and Rich Evans. So we tried to explore through these voices a different way of understanding our relationship to country in the context of the bushfires that ravaged the Blue Mountains. But also we used it to revision what the future of a place like Lithgow and the surrounding area might be, taking account of like this reframing and refocusing our whole relationship, not just to nature, but to the economy. Because one of my frustrations is that we keep seeing the future as just a switch to renewable energy. But actually we have to have a complete revolution in consciousness about the way we think of society. We have to embrace ideas like post-growth economics. We have to get over the endless focus on consumption and growth. And this whole idea of Australia as a renewable energy superpower, whatever that could mean. So for me, this challenge we face is the challenges of how we think about who we are in the world. And we need to understand this by following in the footsteps of the ancient First Nations cultures that shaped this country. Next slide, please. So I call this, how do we go beyond the great unraveling that we're now witnessing in the world as we face the challenge of the climate catastrophe, the environmental degradation, species extinction, and rising political violence and tragic economic inequality. So for me, the question is, how do we support and follow leadership from our First Nations creatives to tell this new story of regenerative living in a multitude of different ways, and how powerful the arts can be in doing this through the different ways we tell stories, particularly in film, in music, in exhibitions, really any way we can to sort of change people's consciousness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Again, so much information in there. We will put up some information onto the BIMWE website along with the seminars so that people can track some of the books and the links and the websites that people are speaking to here. So we'll put that up afterwards and post out some stuff on the mailing list there. Thank you so much for your time, Barbara. Lovely to meet you and hear all of your insights on that one. I love the complete revolution in consciousness. I'm in. Our next speaker up is Paul Brown. Paul currently coordinates the arts projects for the Blue Mountains World Heritage Institute. He is the director of Alphaville, which is a Sydney-based production company specializing in creative projects that have environmental, scientific, and social themes. He's a scriptwriter and creative producer, also a researcher and one-time geologist. This year, he is a Synapse resident with the Australian Network for Art and Technology. Welcome to Paul, and over to you. Today, Paul will be speaking on art, science, environment, methodologies, the Blue Mountains World Heritage Institute Eco Arts Initiative, and a bit about the Recovery Project. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Kate. And David, thank you very much for your welcome to country earlier on. I'm speaking to you from the inner west of Sydney, so I'm on Cadigal country, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I'm a great believer that the most fundamental purpose of the arts is to create and communicate beauty in the world. So it might come as a bit of a surprise, as it has to others that I talk about this topic of art, science, environment. But today I'm probably going to focus a bit more on process, and it may even start to sound a little bit mundane. But our own recovery project that has just come to fruition and is going online with this website is a fantastic example of how beauty has been created through processes that bring together artists, scientists, and other collaborators. So I'm going to say a little bit about methodologies. I'm going to talk about the Blue Mountains World Heritage Institute quite generally, and mention the importance of the Eco Arts initiatives with the Institute. And at the same time, I'm going to try to present a very basic introduction to the Recovery Project, knowing that tomorrow there are 3 of the artists from the Recovery Project talking in the seminar program, and so you can find out a lot more about it. Now, I have to make sure I'm able to move my slides. Sorry, I've got a technical issue. Just give me a moment.
Just while Paul's keying that up, we will be going a little bit over time by the looks of it here, because we still have our last speaker, Bonita. So we understand if people have to drop off, but Bonita's work is amazing. So we'll probably just drop the Q&A and definitely hear the artists. So hopefully you can all stay with us for 10 minutes over the time frame.
Okay, thanks. And I'll try to glide through quickly. A few words about the Blue Mountains World Heritage Institute. The Institute is partnering in planetary health initiatives, and it's been fantastic to hear earlier today about how they're unfolding. The Institute conducts many programs of scientific and environment-focused research. For example, ecological monitoring, there's a large focus at present on upland swamps. But also the Institute works in cultural heritage, in climate change and tourism, and across education programs that are local and international. It's got a 15-year history of eco arts programming, and Cheryl Yin-Low is here today and has been a key figure in that. I'm not sure if anyone knows this, but back in 2004, I think Cheryl became the first environmental arts officer in Australia. That sounds like a big claim, but I'm pretty sure that's right. And it marks the fact that linking the arts with the environment in a formal sense within, for example, Australia Council policy is not that recent, and it's a surprise that it hasn't gained more traction. But for the Institute, yes, there's been 15 years of works that link the arts to environmental issues and to the scientific research of the Institute. And the current recovery project it represents a turning and travel along a new pathway into what we hope will be an unfolding program in years to come. As I go through just a few ideas about how the arts work, the images that I'm showing are actually from the Recovery Project. And I want to acknowledge all the artists who've worked within that project. Many of them came from the Citizen Science Project. And so for them, this project has turned out to be one of their first adventures in the arts. Though, of course, it shouldn't have been a surprise to us, but many of the people already in the Institute's citizen science programs were in fact well-established artists. And I just want to put a few things up about how I think the arts work. As I say here, the arts announce themselves as a way of making meaning out of life. I'm putting it that way because I think the arts is actually better at that than the sciences. Scientists sometimes tend to hide that away, but artists are very good at saying, well, we're here to show how meaning can be made out of life. Reflecting on wants, needs, solving problems, provoking critical debate. And then in terms of process, the arts seem to be a territory where a robust and shared understanding can grow, where ideas can be brought together in a safe space. People suspend their doubts in each other. They may come from very different backgrounds, but in, for example, a community arts workshop, they can suspend any doubt about another person's beliefs for the purpose of conducting a workshop and making art. That allows the exploration of everyday thinking and of everyday problems, leading to the making of knowledge about life and then the announcement of it and the prescription of action to follow. And in some of the work that I've been doing, which is linked with scientists, and I'm on a current Synapse residency through the Australian Network for Art and Technology. I've been asked by scientists pretty much to justify why they should work with the arts and what it is about the arts that justifies the collaboration. And so I'm thinking here about these. Sarah's telling me I'm not sharing my slides.
Yes, I was just going to mention that.
My goodness.
We've just lost you.
I do apologise, everyone. Let me deal with that straight away, just a moment. Okay, we should be...
Yeah, we've got you now.
Okay. So I won't go back over, obviously. I've shown one slide before, but I'm talking about some of the things which are evident in the arts that, and I really am having trouble here. They work through observation, they work through processes of theory making, for example, scenario development, developing proposals about artworks, and they evolve through the cycle of workshops and contemplation. And this is all about creating an agreed expression of community understanding. It also leads to problem solving and ultimately to presentation of the arts as a statement of knowledge and of solutions for consideration by all participants, and then for audiences and to be applied in the world. So I'm always thinking about the linkage, and as I've been trying to say, some of the methodology I was just talking about is quite relatable if you're a scientist, and I think there are overlapping and complementary methodologies. And in the study of how and why this works, one way of expressing it is through the field of comparative knowledge systems, looking at how First Nations knowledge, Western science, lay knowledge, and hybrid knowledge are similar but different, and how they can overlap and collaborate. It leads us to an eco-knowledge, which is all about knowing what to do in a situation of great complexity and uncertainty. And then in practical ways, for example, through natural resource management. basing that on the hybrid knowledge that comes from that integration of different types of knowledge. So I'll cut this short and say that the recovery exhibition and the processes of workshopping arts leading up to that exhibition have been a fantastic example, I think, of the linkage between artists and citizen scientists. And I'd encourage everyone to go into that site, which is now public. The website address is there. And it basically brings together the work of 16 or so artists who've been involved closely in the making of art from the project, but represents interactions with a much wider number of participants who are citizen scientists and artists. And given the time, I think I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. And yes, Paul was showing some of those images, so do have a look at the website. It's a very rich piece of work, considering everything was actually done online, even though we did articize a little. We had to pivot everything in COVID, so it's been quite an extraordinary project. And yes, hopefully you can all engage with that, and please share it as well. Thank you so much, Paul. Our last speaker today is Bonita, whose work spans decades of art activism. Her artwork of the 70s was a warning of environmental issues that are now in full focus. Bonita has a diverse practice, with her methodology based on the premise that a particular idea requires the deployment of particular mediums, contexts, and technologies. She's lectured in sculpture, performance, and installation at the University of New South Wales from 1990 to 2016, as well as the University of Western Sydney, Charles Sturt, Sydney College of the Art, Paran College of Fine Arts, Preston Institute of Fine Arts. Bonita's performances of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 20s explored our relationships to the natural environment, to other species, and to each other, such as the cultural clashes surrounding Aboriginal land rights enacted in Jabiluka, UO2, 1979. Womanhood and pregnancy were celebrated in her performances Breadline, Dog Woman communicates with the younger generation, and Mother shows her daughter to the universe. Examinations of complex environmental issues used the device of inventive personas, for example, the cheerful cooking demonstrators in the Murray River Punch, and the methodical photocopying, which I love this piece, of an exponentially degenerating photograph of Tasmania's Lake Pedder in controlled atmosphere, 1983. Bonita's currently investigating artworks around the topic of the Great Artesian Basin. And today, Bonita will talk on Without Water, There Is No Life. Thank you so much, Bonita. And Sarah, I think, has control of your slides.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. I'm coming from Gadigal country too, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. Yeah, I'm just focusing on the artworks that I've made that directly address issues of water. And as we all know, if we don't have water, there's no life. Next, please. This is the Murray River at Robinvale, where I was brought up on a soldier settlement property. We used to go down the river in the summer to cool off, mainly having picnics down there and swimming in the water, and you know, the temperatures would be up in the 40s. You can see there's a scar on the tree in the foreground. It's probably a Coolman, I'd say. There was very much an awareness of the presence of the Aboriginal people, the Latchi Latchi people. They lived on the river under the wire of the Aboriginal protection people, and travelling down to the river, we'd pass scar trees, which were amazing. Next, please. My childhood was very creative, and back then the parenting method was benign neglect. Our parents were too busy to be helicopter parents. His friends and I off riding out into the bush to Lake Benini. Next, please. The first project that I did relating to water, to the Murray River, was after I came back to Australia, being overseas for 5 years. And I became aware that the Murray River was beginning to be in a sorry state with salination and a lot of the effects of deforestation, irrigation, and pollution. These are 5 places that I went to document as indications, taking people to the river, showing them what the river is actually like, and showing them the geological changes along the river. Next, please. I took the approach of a cartographer, pretending that I was flying over the river bank where the water meets the land, with my camera framed through the viewfinder onto grids. The one on the left is near Corryong, where the river is a fast-flowing mountain stream. The central one is in the Barmah Forest, where the river it has begun its long, slow, wandering, meandering journey across the very flat landscape to South Australia. And on the right, there's a typical sandbar where the river deposits sand, and it's a wonderful ecological phenomenon in itself. Next, please. And on the left again, the river has made its way through limestone to the estuary, and the estuary is via Lake Alexandrina and the Coorong into the sea in South Australia. Next, please. Now, in 2007, the Millennium Drought was just an absolute disaster for the river and the riparian environment. So my daughter and I went up into the mountains in Victoria to witness the start of the Murray River, which is a little spring, the headwaters. In the centre, we went to the mountain stream near Corryong again, and weeds had grown into the rocks because the river was so low. And on the right, you can see the mucky debris and the clay in the riverbed just sort of soaking, because the river was so low. Very upsetting to see all this, by the way. I was very attached to the river. Next, please. Yeah, Lake Boga gets its water from the Murray, and it was completely dried up. People had fun hitting golf balls into the lake. Don't ask me. And so hundreds and hundreds of golf balls were cleaned up in the dried up lake. It was completely dried up. There was no water in it whatsoever. And at the sandbar, at the junction of the Murray and the Murrumbidgee rivers, the water would go down so far that the relationship between the clay riverbed and the sand was revealed. And again, weeds were growing in the riverbed. Next, please. This is another lake dependent on the Murray, Lake Benini in New South Wales. And as you can see, not a drop of water. Quite ironic that there was a little water measurement thing in the middle of it all. Next, please. And this is on the left, Bottle Bend, which was totally polluted by acid sulfate. The river looked like urine. And because the water was so low, it revealed how salt encrusted the snags and so on in the river. And at Mildura, blue-green algae, which is the cause of the fish kill in Menindee recently, but we'll get to that later. Next, please. And in South Australia, near Swan Reach, the lowered river revealed this amazing rock formations. And on the right, again, back to the estuary at Lake Alexandrina. Next, please. And then came the rain. So I jumped in the car and went to document the floods. And this was one of the more extraordinary photographs that I took. You can see a whole year's supply of hay was completely subsumed by the water. Next, please. So the mapping has been a tool that I've used quite often. This is an etching. The top image is one of the early satellite photographs of the Murray in flood. And then below that on the left is a map used by the steamboat captains to indicate how deep the water was as they navigated the river, and also indicated where the timber was to deforestate the river environment to power their boats. Right of that, and you can see a detail it on the left is a beer can with bullet holes that I found on the riverbank, indicating the culture. And below that, the sandbar on one side of the river, down on the bottom, and above that on the right, what it looked like on the other side of the river. Next, please. I also used the photographs, of the grids along the river for other works, including a series that used the river as a metaphor for our lives. And you can see a baby being born out of the cracks in the clay. The photographs I took in Barmah Forest. Next, please. This is a work placing the lakes that are dependent on the river into the context of a world map. That I love that these maps of the lakes are like fetuses and uterus. And I've also indicated land, the way we've divided up the land ownership around the lake, and the whole drawing or work on paper has images of dead trees scattered over the whole image. And the piece on the floor is, you can't see it from this angle, but it sort of wends its way across the floor. And it's a whole lot of images of women's bodies representing the generations after generations of people who've lived along the Murray, the Indigenous people. And on the floor on the right there's a book that the people could flick through to see the photographs I took of the dead trees in the dry lake, it's called, but it's not dry anymore. It's flooded to provide water for irrigation. And so all of the trees that used to be in it have died. So it's like a tree cemetery. Next, please. This is Murray River Punch. I took on the persona of a cooking demonstrator, which was a very new thing back then. I saw one in the Myers department store. Anyway, here I am measuring pea to put into the mix. All of the ingredients were the pollutions that were going into the river. Yum. Next, please. And in 2010, in response to the Millennium Drought, I made a dip that you could eat with crackers because there wasn't enough water in the Murray to make a drink. Next, I'm putting the acid sulfate that I collected in it. This is controlled atmosphere. I printed, photocopied the image of Lake Pedder, which had already been flooded and just destroyed in response to the threat that the Franklin River was going to go down the same track. But fortunately, the decision was made to not flood it. But after photocopying the photocopies, like a very dutiful bureaucrat, I completely obliterated the original image of Lake Pedder. Next, please. This is some work I did for Documenta addressing the plastics pollution of the ecology of water. Water goes everywhere. You can't stop it, you know. And my concept was that in the future, genetically engineered creatures would clean up our hideous mess for us. And all of the creatures are here in a natural history museum display that people could wander around and read the taxonomies of all the creatures. And on the walls, there was photographs of what nature was like back in 1906, taken in Athens, Castle, and Sydney. And on the right-hand side, the photographs represent 2017, when the installation was first shown in Athens, of the emergency of the plastics pollution that had to be cleaned up. And so you can see all, you know, next please. There was also a touch screen where people could find out more about plastic pollution, and also all of the taxonomies of the creatures were on the touch screen. And the taxonomies were actually based on actual taxonomies of the creatures that I'd represented using plastic vacuum cleaners off the streets of Sydney. The way they move around is using the way that vacuum cleaners suck in air and expel air. The Hoover maneuver, that's what I called it, the Hoover maneuver. Next, please. Yeah, there's, they all, you know, talk to each other and, yeah, hung out, you know. Next, please. This is one of the creatures. It's Trump pussy. Yeah. Next, please. And this is ocelot. You can see how ocelot would be very good at sucking up all the plastic. And the last sentence in the taxonomy tells us that there are only 50 land-based ocelots in the ocelots in the wild when the creature was engineered to suck up plastic. Next, please. As you can see, I often use humour in my work to draw people in and, draw people in, really. I mean, the performances of Murray River Punch, but everyone was laughing in horror. Anyway, this next artwork is not funny. This is the fish traps, the Noongar fish traps in Bawarrina that are approximately 40,000 years old and are reputed to be the oldest man-made structures in the world. I've been fascinated by Bawarrina for years, and the Darling River, actually. I must do a project on specifically on the Darling River in the future. Next, please. Downstream from the fish traps, there's a place where ochre was collected for ceremony, because the reason, possibly the reason why the fish traps were created is because up to 20 nations gathered there for ceremony and meetings. And so there was a big mob to feed at these times. Next, please. So this is the one that's not so funny. This is, I was driving to Menindee to check out this crazy fish kill. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? What do I want to do there? You know, and I was thinking, I want to put us in that fish kill. And the image of Millet's Ophelia suiciding in the river came to my mind. And so I'm thinking, who can photograph me doing this? It's got to be a performance for camera. And the woman in the motel room next door to me had this enormous camera, professional camera, Melissa Williams-Brown. And I told her about my idea. She said, yes, we have to do it. So we got up really early in the morning, and so that we wouldn't be disturbed, and took this photograph, and me in amongst the maggots, the stench. It was just disgusting. You might be able to see a fly on my face there. Anyway, it's just a very, very vivid reminder of what can happen. I'd like to thank all the presenters actually for talking about how art works, as a communication. I've always seen art, my artwork, as a communication. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Bonita. And I think that image to finish on here for today is so striking. We won't do Q&A today. We might have some more time tomorrow. I would like to say thank you so much to all our esteemed speakers for your time, your consideration, your efforts, your years and decades in environmental activism through culture, academia, artistic practice, and physical hard work. We have another incredible lineup of speakers tomorrow in the second seminar, which is Eco Arts in Practice. So please tune in again if you can tomorrow. I'd like to do a very quick recap to say thank you to David and some words from people to reflect on, that we should sit in country to connect and reconnect and connect to traditional custodians. To Liz, thank you for your words of saying how the action of one person can make a change. I am a firm believer in this also. Sabrina, using the arts to connect and communicate, and especially bringing in the different age groups through all of the public programs. David Curtis, I loved your words of indignation and affinity. I think they're very striking words to draw on with all of our anger and frustration in this space. Barbara, thank you so much for your talking to building on the traditional knowledge that exists and jumping into those spaces, and your complete revolution in consciousness. Paul, the agreed expression of understanding and your linkages. And Bonita, I was thinking of your benign neglect of the children, but maybe we can transform that into exceptional care of nature as our kin. I know the Dutch also still parent with benign neglect, and they dump their children in the woods, to which most of the rest of the world is horrified, but apparently their children are the happiest ones on the planet. So yes, let's go back to dumping our children in the woods and caring for nature. Thank you to our co-hosts, the Blue Mountains Cultural Centre, from myself for the opportunity to chair this meeting, and also to the Blue Mountains World Heritage Institute, who is the primary host for today. Thank you so much for bringing all these speakers together. I think everyone will agree it's been just an incredibly rich space with so much information. Thank you for your time and your efforts. And hopefully we'll see you again in the morning at 10 o'clock.
And before everyone goes out, there was one question in the chat. Yes, we have recorded this session and it will be up on YouTube pretty soon. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. Enjoy the sunshine all.
Thanks, everyone.